Right. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for sticking with it. I'm Rosemary Collier from the University of Warwick. I work at the campus at Wellbeing, and I'm also chair of SWAN, the South Warwickshire Area Network for Wildlife. So I kind of have two hats. And before we go to the panel, just to say from my point of view, in my working life, resilience is we focus on vegetables. We were originally the National Vegetable Research Station, and so resilience to me is about helping growers with crops, vegetable crops of the future that are more resilient to whatever climate change throws at them, including different pests and diseases. And then I guess in terms of wildlife, then it's about how resilient we can make our wildlife in this area, which still is having a lot of challenges thrown at it through development and other things. So how can we help our nature to be resilient? So I think this is an absolutely fantastic lineup. Here we're really privileged to have this group of people. So I'm going to sort of do it in terms of order of sort of, well, no, I'll do it from right to left. Yeah. I was thinking another right to left. Right. So first of all, Stephen Norrie, who's chair of Net Zero Stratford. So an activist, I guess. Yeah, maybe. Maybe. Helen Ferrier, who is Director of Innovation and Knowledge Exchange at Leith, linking environment and farming. And Helen's quite recently moved from the National Farmers Union, so has a good perspective on farming, which we haven't really touched on much yet, I think. Then Manuela Perteghella, who's our, well, she's not actually my MP, sadly, but she's MP for Stratford-on-Avon. And then Susan Junid, who's chair of Stratford District Council. Leader of Stratford District Council. Right, brilliant. Okay, so welcome and thank you all. So I think we're going to follow, first of all, the same sort of introductory format that we had in the first session this morning. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves with a description of their brief. We're going to do this briefly, of their role and interests, and they then say what resilience means to them in the context of what they do. So over to you, Steve.
Hello, thanks. Yeah, I'm Stephen Norrie. I'm the chair of Stratford Climate Action and Net Zero Stratford. We, in the latter capacity, in the former capacity, we're activists. In the latter capacity, we run a repair cafe with the Town Trust, a community kitchen, and a climate hub in the town. One thing we try and do is to weave into that a little bit of thinking about, what's coming in terms of, ultimate destinies, in terms of the transition within our society and economy. So I think, for me, what does resilience mean? It means understanding that. It means understanding that, things could change quite drastically. It means being prepared in your self-narrative to understand, what happens if, the worst happens, or if bad things happen, if reform gets in, or, if, we get to higher levels of warming. I remember when I was younger, avoiding Mark Linus's book 6 Degrees in the library because I was terrified of it. So when I became a climate activist, of course, I had to read that. And you do have to read that. But I think in terms of resilience, we talk about climate impacts, but, I think that there's also a possibility of another kind of impact, which is just that our economic system is just going to collapse. It's not just climate impacts on GDP and impacts on companies, but it's the impact of renewables on capital accumulation. The biggest source of demand for oil globally is the internal combustion engine. If we transition to electric vehicles, that source of demand for oil is gone. And this is a huge component of value of markets. So, people talk about a carbon bubble. The stock exchange is largely made up of assets that have no value potentially. ultimately the market system itself. What is it pricing? You know, on different theories, there's different arguments, but you know, it's pricing allocation of scarce resources. You know, on a classical argument, it's pricing labour values. If we're transitioning to a system in which energy is free and the work is all done by robots, then what are prices going to be tracking? So capitalism itself may just not work. And at that point, you know, you get an amplification of the possible crisis, but you also get an interesting opportunity. I mean, you know, I think a lot of the things we're doing locally with these repair cafes and so on, we can understand that as sowing seeds. These are things that we're doing and they work, but they're not as big as they should be. We need to be bigger. And you know, as things start to fall apart, maybe that there comes an opportunity for things to grow much quicker than seems to be happening at the moment. So I think we shouldn't be disheartened if some of the things that we're doing now maybe aren't catching seed quite as quickly as they could, because if we have the ability to build enough resource, enough knowledge, enough experience in our communities, we have a seed that can grow when, you know, things get tough. So yeah, crisis is going to be interesting as well. As Rupert has a chapter in one of his books, I think, about crisis and opportunity. But yeah, I think that's something that's very important to keep in mind, and I'll pass on at this point.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Helen Ferrier, and I've lived near Stratford for about just over 20 years and grew up in Worcestershire, so it's very much my area in the Midlands. And after studying environmental science at UEA, actually, we were there at the same time, and then in London, then I went to work for the NFU, as Rosemary said, and then now I'm with LEAF, which I don't know if any of you have heard of, but maybe I'll say a few words about what LEAF is. So it stands for Linking Environment and Farming, and it was established in 1991, which I think was very much ahead of its time. Not that many people were talking about environmental sustainability in farming at that time, and it's now a global charity, and it promotes sustainable and resilient farming. Our knowledge exchange work, we work with farmers, obviously researchers, advisors, educators, and supply chain, agri-food supply chain partners. We also run a global farm assurance scheme called the Leaf Mark, and this is I'm wearing this because it helps people remember. This is the logo that shows whether the product on the shelf is produced to the Leaf Mark standard, which is an environmental standard for farming, and it operates across 55 different countries across the world, which I can talk more about that later if you want to. We also do a lot of work with schools, and we provide curriculum-based information on sustainable farming, because schools, particularly secondary schools, but also primary schools, are very much driven by what's in the curriculum, and that's what teachers need support and materials from. We also have, as well as having leaf demonstration farms, which I can talk about later if you want to, we also have leaf demonstration schools, and Ulster Grammar School, for example, is now a leaf demonstration school, and part of that is working with other schools in their groups. Public engagement is also really central to the work that LEAF does, and Open Farm Sunday is a LEAF initiative, and we had our 20th anniversary on Sunday that's just gone, and I understand we had 196,000 people going onto farms on last Sunday. So a lot of engagement with the public. So in terms of resilience, I mean, it's definitely a driver for LEAF's work, and it's around a firm belief that there's potential for food and farming systems to be more resilient, and that's really a driver for my career in farming. So I'm very much an optimist. When you see people doing really excellent things, it means more people can do those things. So there's a really clear link between the natural environment and looking after the natural environment and tackling climate change, and therefore being more resilient to the impacts of climate change, which we've obviously heard a lot about from Rupert earlier. The scientific research base is telling us more and more about what's happening in the soil, the interactions between the biodiversity in soils and the crops and the plants and the biodiversity above the ground. The more we learn about that, the more that we can manage farming systems in a way that makes use of those nature-based solutions in the soils. And similarly with water, for example, how we manage land impacts water resources, and that can inform farming practices. So I think it's really important for us to remember that a resilient food system requires food production to be resilient as well. And actually that's why retailers and food businesses really want to work with LEAF and similar sustainable farming organisations. They know, well, we all have to eat, we know that. So for communities to be resilient, to have enough to eat, the food businesses that feed into that, whatever their size, have to be resilient, and farming has to be resilient to feed into those food businesses.
Thank you. Hi everyone, so my name is Manuela Perteghella. I'm the Member of Parliament for Stratford-on-Avon, and I represent mainly a rural constituency, so we got market towns but also lots of villages, and an agricultural and farming constituency, and we will probably talk a little bit more about that. So I am member of, for my sins, of two select committees now. So one is the Education Select Committee, and the other one, which is relevant to this panel, and gave me an insight really on how government and parliament interact, is the Environmental Audit Committee. And the Environmental Audit Committee is the parliamentary body that holds the government to account on their climate targets, their environmental targets. So we audit the work of government, but we also look at, do our own inquiries. And the issue of resilience comes again and again. So for example, one of inquiries was on extreme weather, heat, which actually was during the May when we had the mini heat wave. And the work of select committees is based on evidence. So you have academics, you have experts, you have campaigners that will come and give us evidence. And then you get also ministers coming, and we can say, what is your department doing? And the heat waves gave us the heat wave inquiry gave me a little bit of a perspective on resilience. Because for me, resilience is that kind of anticipating what will happen in the future and make sure that our communities are so strong and so prepared that the damage that will come can be mitigated. And so we talk about heat waves, and we talked about all the things that will come. You know, if everyone is using air conditioning because we can't live in our houses that have not been built for this climate emergency, then you will have blackouts as well. So you need to prepare for those as well. We talked about in new settlements, why don't we plan for blue infrastructure so that we cool down our cities and our towns and our new settlements. And of course there were academics that told us, yes, but then you have to prepare for a mosquito-borne disease in the future. So how do you mitigate that risk? And so it's that kind of thinking. And we do all our work, and undoubtedly we will have recommendations that we will put to DEFRA. And what happens is that these are just recommendations, and government can accept the recommendations, can part accept them, can reject them, can part reject them. And I feel like now I've been member for a few months now of the Environmental Audit Committee, and every time we call the kind of ministers and their officials, it's clear to me that they don't talk to each other. They don't talk across departments. So I think, I give you, I think we're going to talk about the local nature recovery plans that DEFRA wants councils, local authorities to implement. And so DEFRA is pushing for that. And then on the other side, we have the Ministry for Housing, Local Government and Communities that actually is weakening environmental protections in planning. And so you got that kind of conflict. They don't talk to each other. So for me, one of the ways that we can, in a way, either we tell Whitehall you need to talk to each other and you have to embed resilience, in all decision makings across all departments. So that climate resilience, including, as Rupert was saying, a national strategy for adaptation, which we need to have, which then has to, be properly resource funded and be accountable and go to our communities. But for me, is that I realized it in these 2 years that Parliament doesn't have much power over the executive. So the legislative doesn't have much power over the executive. And I think one thing that could change, could be a game changer is if select committees' recommendations are actually binding. And so they become requirements because they're based on evidence, they are cross-party, they become requirements for government to accept them. And they have to implement them. And, I don't know how we can change that because obviously it's a constitutional change, but I think at the moment, if Parliament could take back control, especially because as Stephen says, we don't know which government is going to come, and we need to make Parliament resilient to whatever is coming next, which could be also, if you're all from Warwickshire, you will know that the current Warwickshire County Council has now undeclared the climate emergency.
Yes.
So that's what they've done. So they are kind of, all these years of cross-party support and overwhelming support is being taken away, and then that will have a real repercussion on our communities and so on. So I'll pass on, but there is a lot of work to do to make our democracy resilient as well, if really we want to save our planet.
Thanks. I'm also originally trained as an environmental scientist. I did my master's and PhD in the biodiversity of agricultural crops and the genetic resilience of those crops under particular circumstances, not only to disease but also to climate change and to drought and other crises. I actually did some climate modelling 40 years ago, and I went to my first lecture on climate change over 40 years ago. So sometimes I feel as if things have not exactly moved on. But in my professional life, after doing research for 10 years, I moved into working on various projects, things like renewables, circular economy, sustainability, agricultural, genetic diversity, sustainable fuels, energy efficiency, and waste strategies. I've worked on projects that have involved DEFRA, DEC, the Local Government Association, and local governments almost all across the country, and been involved in putting recommendations to councils on how to do climate change in their areas and do climate change action plans. So that's a very, very quick about my professional thing, but I've also been involved in the Environment Agency as an advisor, and I've also I've been a trustee of Warwickshire Wildlife Trust. I've been the leader twice now at this Stratford District Council, and in my first time as a leader, I started Act on Energy, which is the energy efficiency advice service, which has now been going for 26 years. And also Stratford at that time was one of the leading councils on Local Agenda 21, which was the kind of sustainability campaign of its time. In 2019, I put forward a notice of motion at the District Council to declare a climate emergency at the District Council, and led the task force on what the District Council could do to tackle climate emergency. And I'm now a leader again, and have started making sure that we do all that is within our powers And that's, I have to say, I stress within our powers, given some of the legislation that is coming through. I have been working on things like, originally I did the review of the Green Deal pilot, and the Future Home Standard was meant to have been introduced over 10 years ago, and we've been putting pressure on for that. It has now actually come to fruition, but although it will not be introduced now for another 2 years. And in actual fact, in actual thing, but that is the kind of thing where we do need government to put a lot more pressure on those that are building and doing development to be able to encourage that the homes for the future, that they should be energy efficient, they should be low cost to heat, but also not won't be overheated, and they can move off fossil fuels. We've been waiting a long time for that. We are now going to move into that thing, although not frustratingly, not quite fast enough. The net zero economy, which I've been involved in, is worth an awful lot to this country. And it's the skills of the future are involved there, and we should be encouraging them. So if I was to talk about what I would want from government, I would want government to actually trust local government a little more and give us a little more power to do what is within our powers to do, because we do have a lot of powers if we are allowed to use them. And when it comes to resilience, one of the things I just want to say is about developing the capacity and ability to absorb, cope with shocks and recover from their impacts. But in human terms, and we have to remember that it's in human terms, it's about preparing for, responding to, and recovering from hazardous events. And but at the same time, whilst minimising damage to society, well-being and environment. And we have to remember and take into account those on low incomes, those in rural areas that are not able to be, take advantage of what's in a town, and those with disabilities who are, where affordability is a real issue. We have to remember that not everybody can afford some of the things that we can. Community is important for resilience, and the ability to make local decisions is important. I would stress over and over again the power of community to be able to do things. And we saw that in the pandemic. It's been talked about this morning, and we must not undermine that. A well-adapted, resilient country needs action across society, and that means we've got to take everybody with us. We cannot have divide and rule, because that leads to a dangerous situation. And as a person, and I'm going to put this as a person, I lived abroad where I saw what happens when communities are divided and ruled. You have to take people with you. I would not ever want to go into a situation where we get civil unrest. We have to have the benefits, show the benefits of action, and there are benefits. If you are, for example, having energy efficiency, you are saving money as well as tackling climate change. Make sure that you always emphasize the benefits to community, and communicate, and never stop communicating and telling people and bringing people with you. We are in it together as a society. Don't let it destroy us. We're in it together, and we have to make sure that resilience is for all of us.
Great, thank you. Very good introductions. Right, so I think we'll skip the second question. We'll go on to the third one. So I'm quite interested in us looking at resilience in terms of how we can plan for it. And obviously Rupert was telling us about how we could plan for it with our storage cupboards. But there are sort of that's a short-term solution in a way. And we need to look at the longer term as well. So although I don't want us to get bogged down in the South Warwickshire local plan, it'd be interesting to discuss how such a plan could be used to build in resilience. And I'll just sort of chuck in as well the new local nature recovery strategy for Warwickshire, which makes recommendations, a strategy for how we should support nature in the county in the future. And then, as I think mentioned already by Manuela, we shouldn't forget that the majority of the land area in the county is actually farmland. So I think there's something really interesting. I mean, farmers are part of communities as well. So how we should build them into the plan as well, and how communities should engage with them. Okay, right. So, do you want to start, Manuela? Actually,
Yeah,
and,
yes.
I don't know if this works.
Does it- Does this work? No.
Still-
And does this work? Yeah.
Does it? Yeah, it
Yeah.
does.
Perfect.
You and I push it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, perfect. So yes, thank you, Rosemary. So yes, as I said, the constituency is very rural, and we have obviously takes its name from the River Avon. So we have flooding as a challenge, and we are seeing flooding, recurrent episodes of flooding. So I live in a village where we do have vulnerable people who are evacuated when storms comes and when their houses are flooded. So we're already seeing that kind of emergency planning, and we've been quite good with the flooding planning in this area. So we got flood wardens, we have parish councils that are trained, we know where to get our sandbags and so on. So we know how to give the alarm, we know where people has to be evacuated. We got the alerts as well. So each community which has learned after flooding and flooding episodes, and they learn to be resilient, and we are mitigating as much as possible. But we're also obviously we are having heat waves as well. And I did a learning work with young farmers in my constituency that were switching to sustainable farming, and these were young farmers. Some of them were tenant farmers, and some of them inherited the land, the farming from their parents, but they wanted to farm in a very different way. So you were talking about regenerative farming, and that's what they were going to do. But it really struck me so obviously they got the flooding as an impact on food production, but the heat, can wipe out harvest and kill cattle and sheep and so on. And some of the farmers, the young farmers, were actually planting trees and hedges again on this land that they were tenants on, because obviously the farmers were told in the 30s, 50s, not forward planning, we say get rid of the tree, make the most of this land. But actually, the animals with the heat wave don't have any shade. There's no shade because the hedgerows have all gone and the trees. So they were starting, but before a tree gets, the mighty oak, it takes a long time to come back. So again, but the landscape is changing as well. So we have more where you have cattle. I think you could put more tree cover as well, because that does helps this. And also they were thinking about what kind of crop to grow as well that would withstand the flood, the heat, all this. So they were very, very alert because they live with nature every day. They see the changes of our outdoor environment. So they were very alerted, and I think there is not enough support for the rural resilience to help our farmers, because if we help them, then we can become locally food secure, because obviously food scarcity is a huge threat. So I think in relation to the local nature recovery strategy, and also the local energy plans are going to come as well. And I think, I don't know whether Susan will talk a little bit about that, but we are in a local government reorganization process at the moment, which could make, we will have just one council. When we are 2 tiers, it will be just one council, and that will make probably will be a big positive. We can make it localized, will be positive, because then the people in charge of planning will also be people in charge of transport, in charge of resilience, like we got the Warwickshire Resilience Forum, which I would like to see more involved with communities in that preparedness. But for me, is really as a parliamentarian, I really want to see government departments work together and embed the resilience and the climate resilience in every decision making, which at the moment is not there. And so how do we trickle it down to the communities? And it might be that you have different community programs, the flooding, the flood program, which I think works very well here, because we learned, after being burned, we learned how to live with floods. Might not be, for example, applicable to heat waves, because heat waves is not localized. Heat waves can cover a huge area. So we might have to do things different depending on these extreme weather patterns. But I want actually all these different departments talking to each other. We know that with the local nature recovery, we can obviously embed the flood protection using natural flood defenses, which maybe some of you in the room have done very successfully to mitigate the danger of flooding. Dave in Shipstone has done that, so with his team, so that's really, really good. But also the health of the soil as well. How we can manage to make sure that our soil is healthy. Now, I will also tell you that here in our and probably, I don't know if Stephen comes back to that, but we have quite a big of a challenge between, we are competing, how do you say, competing aims of how land use should be used, especially farmland. And we want to achieve our net zero targets. So we have quite a lot of solar farms coming up. But these, in my experience, upset communities because they see we should protect their land for food. So we go because often this land is quite best and versatile land. So, but then it gets leased for many years, so it cannot be used for crop growing. So there's this competing and challenges that land has. So it's really important to see how we look at that. But we got local energy plans that the new authority will be in charge of, the new unitary council. So to see how we can be energy resilient and independent in South Warwickshire, where are we going to put our our hydro, energy, our solar farms, and so on. But that's something, because you talked about bringing the communities with you, and that one of my challenges is often we have big the communities will get behind local energy farms, solar farms. I say solar because obviously we have solar is quite important for us here. Because we can't do tidal, and we can't do wind is a bit onshore wind is a bit less common, but they are very, very resistant towards large scales commercial projects. So how do we bring these communities together, because they don't see the co-benefits of that kind of of resilience and so on. So yes, I'll go and
Susan, do you want to come?
Yes, Susan,
yes, I live in Ulster, and Ulster is has been one of the most flood hit towns in the whole of South Warwickshire. 1998, there was a lot of people were flooded in 98, and again in 2001, and again in 2007. Actually, there's a lot of work was done to build up the defence funds, but obviously that is not sufficient. And more recently, a lot has been done on natural flood management. But that is not going to be, as was raised this morning, there's going to be an increase in the amount of flooding, and we do have to raise awareness. One of the ways in which we've been able to raise awareness, actually, just on this one issue, has been very, very small scale, using very small amounts of money in a village called Great Olm, where they were one of the successful applicants to the Community Climate Change and Nature Fund that the district council's running. And activists, local people in that community worked together to clear. They got trained by the county council. The county council hadn't got the capacity or the ability, the capacity or the funds really, I think, to do the work themselves. but they got trained by them, and they went out and cleared all the drains and made sure that what had happened in one winter where children were not able to get to school because the roads were all flooded would not happen again. So that just illustrates just the power of community if you just give them the proper resources. I think you asked about South Warwickshire Local Plan, and it is key. It's going to be key part to any climate change mitigation, adaptation, or resilience. However, it has to be done within legislation that is set at a national level. And that is a real complication sometimes. But also, we are a democracy. We also have to listen to all the people that are input into it as well, and weigh the pros and cons to come to a solution. And I can talk more about that if required. I'm a great advocate of community energy. I am a director of Heart of England Community Energy, and I always have been an advocate of community energy because the Heart of England Community Energy is actually on contaminated land. It was on a farm that was originally used for testing for BSE, and therefore cannot be used for agriculture or any other use. So therefore, I say it has a very handy use there, but also puts money into the communities and has put a lot of money into the food bank and various other projects. In Stratford District Council, we were very fortunate. It's a council that doesn't have debt, and it's a council that was able to get a considerable grant from government to put solar on all the leisure centres. So far, 3 have all got solar panels on leisure centres now, and the aim is to have the final 2 completed in this coming year. I'm happy to answer other questions, but I think that's probably enough from me.
Yeah, we've talked quite a lot about mobilising communities and that being a really supportive environment, and we definitely see that with farming. It's great to hear about that, your experience with the younger farmers. We hear a lot about how much risk there is in farming and how farmers are some people say risk averse. I prefer to say risk aware. They're really risk aware. A lot of the factors that go into running a successful farming business are not necessarily in the control of the farmer, of course. The weather, global markets, global geopolitics, regulation, prices. So many of these things aren't in the control of the individual farmer or farm worker or landowner. And so bringing farmers together into networks and groups that can learn from each other, but that can also feel like they can see if a new way of doing something on the farm is actually someone else has tried it and it's worked, or they've learned something from it, then that really helps de-risk the transition to different, more sustainable farming practices. So I think there's a lot in community, in mobilising groups of farmers in local areas, and that the way people learn. Certainly, what we hear from our members is peer-to-peer learning is really very powerful, as opposed to being taught by an expert apparently, or a professor or a doctor telling them what to do. To have that idea that actually you can learn from each other, but also an exchange of knowledge between farmers and advisors and academics is also really powerful, because we all have to learn from each other to then solve these major problems. So yeah, I think de-risking the adaptation methods, measures that are going to really be required on farms is very important. Reducing reliance on bought-in inputs, so you have a more circular system on farms, actually, what's really great about working for Leaf, the NFU was great. I was there for over 20 years, but at the NFU you get a lot of the problems. You hear a lot of the problems because we're representing farmers to government and decision makers. What you get at Leaf are the farmers who are really at the leading edge of changing their practices to be more sustainable, and actually looking at nature as the source of solutions, rather than, so that the power of biology rather than the power of chemistry, I guess, and really understanding that actually once you start to change certain things, once you start to, for example, reduce the amount of bought-in fertilizer and pesticides within a field, for example, the soil and microorganisms and their interaction with the roots start to do it for themselves. And you kind of almost don't, I mean, it's very interesting to understand that, but even the academics, there's a huge amount we still need to know about how that actually works. You don't really need to understand how it works, because it actually starts to happen. And what you get if you have these groups that are actually farming in a similar area, because it's, you know, geography is obviously very important in soil type, you start to be able to see the things working. And it's great working at Leaf, because you see these people that actually have been doing this stuff for 10, 15 years, and they're encouraging the people that are just starting to go down that journey. And it's very much a journey, continuous improvement. We're never going to get to the end of the journey of more sustainable and regenerative practices, but it does make me optimistic, because people are doing this and they're seeing results for their business as well as for the environment.
Thank you. A couple of quick points, I think, and then we'll open to the, because we're sort of running out of time a bit.
Okay. Okay. I mean, with regards to planning, we're all falling out a bit about there's that work local plan at the moment where housing is being placed. I think, this is something where we need to partly go outside of the remit of that and go back to just the concept of how we build in this country. Because, part of the problem we've got in this area is that we've just got so many houses being scheduled for building in this area. And part of the reason for that is that it's overflow from Birmingham and Coventry.
No, it isn't actually.
Is it not?
No.
Let's have a
Go,
discussion. This is
No,
good.
no. Councils have to take into account the building from other areas, but on this occasion, or for this plan, we do not have to take, and it has been, we do not have to take overflow from Birmingham or Coventry, and that's the figures, some of the figures that have been given to us.
Has that changed since the last?
Yes, it has.
Okay, right. Well, apologies. Fake news.
Good. Good.
I mean, one of the things we should be doing is densifying our housing. How we build houses. We need houses to be built in close proximity to each other, so that facilities that serve those houses are better served by numbers of people that make them more viable. So, I mean, if you've driven through Birmingham, we're kind of building a suburban metropolis there. It's a metropolis built of suburban houses, and I think we need to start building up in Birmingham. That was one thing I was going to say about that. In terms of biodiversity, these plans, what we've been falling out about is where housing gets located. And I think we need something similar for biodiversity. We need to actually be, democratically coming to decisions about where we want to locate biodiversity projects. I mean, a lot of housing developments have been able to wriggle out of biodiversity net gain requirements through exemptions, from what I understand anyway. I thought so 86% exemptions was a statistic I saw this morning. I think the government is introducing more exemptions. So not great in that front. There's obviously risks to biodiversity offsetting schemes if those are brought out by developers, because developers might be very open to setting up an offset scheme on paper, but is it actually going to manifest in the way that you would like it to, or will it just be there in the papers that go through the planning process, and then a couple of years down the road, when it actually is realised, it isn't actually happened as planned. So having someone other developers planning for these things and then requiring developers to contribute to them seems to be the way to go. And maybe Rosemary will be able to mention a couple of pointers about that, because I'm sure you know more about this than I do. I think, I mean, Patrick mentioned it earlier in terms of biodiversity and farming. You know, you can farm in ways that are very biodiverse. You know, farming doesn't have to be either or in this respect. It's, you know, hedgerow restoration, beetle banks, you know, doing this kind of thing, veganic farming. Ian Tolhurst's farm is a really great example of this, and you can go and watch videos about Tolhurst Organics online that I'd recommend people to go and check out. Something like that, again, it does depend on skills. It does depend on having people with the knowledge and with the support to do that. And I mean, Tolhurst Organics is brilliant, but that's because Ian Tolhurst is brilliant. Not everyone is that brilliant. And yeah, trying to educate people, trying to find the right people to do that, trying to support those people to come forward is a challenge. I mean, it seems to me, yeah, you know, there's a lot of farmers would like to do more, farmers we can support, but I mean, there's probably farmers who don't want to do more as well. And I mean, it seems to me that it wouldn't be the worst thing to do for public authorities to just buy some land and make it available to young people who want to do a bit of farming, and let them experiment and let them try things and try to build that knowledge that way. Because we just need those skills, and we need to invest in young people. We need to, you know, we need to create those pathways for people from education to move into things. I think I'm getting the impression that I've been asked to hasten along here, so I'll pass it on. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, no, I think because how much time have we got left? 20 minutes. Okay, so I think we'll, brilliant responses, everybody. I think we'll open it to the floor now. Right, so, yeah, David's first.
My question is about preparation. I wonder if the panel could recommend a novel which explores post-apocalypse future. I mean, I think that we can learn something from thoughtful developments in literature. Could anybody give some idea?
War games. Yeah, I don't know a particular novel, but I would not want to replicate some of the you know, yeah, I wouldn't want it. I wouldn't want any of it to happen to us if I could possibly avoid it. Yes, but I think actually we have enough lessons around the world in the scientific community. We don't need fiction to tell us about it. We actually have been told. But the Climate Change Committee, for example, it produced its latest report on adaptation in May this year, 2026. And there's some really, really good material that where they've been warning about we must do more and faster, and both on resilience, adaptation, and preparation.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to say anything before we go?
No novel.
No novels, but in terms of blue skies thinking and blowing your mind, I'd suggest reading James R. Beebe and Tony Sieber's book Cllr, which is utterly crazy from many perspectives, but it does boldly think about where we might be heading in terms of horizons, not just of ecosystem collapse, but of economic system collapse. And it's not hard read, so it's a little bit novelistic in that respect.
This actually is to do with you mentioned the local nature recovery strategy, and I just wonder if that can actually be enshrined within the South Warwickshire local plan. And I say that partly because I was actually and where the areas, the strategic areas where it has the biodiversity uplift, which is actually enshrined within it. I said because I was actually recently at the sort of the Warwick district now, but in the Bradford Semele solar farm appeal, and the planning officer had actually never heard of the local nature recovery strategy or the nature partnership, even though it is actually referred to. But yeah, it just will be helpful because it is mandated to actually have that
think
uplift.
Susan will respond, but I mean, it's a really good point about, I mean, so I've been involved in the development of the local nature recovery strategy in a very minor way. But communication, again, is such a huge issue. How do you get that message out there?
Yeah, I've actually got a copy of the Warwickshire Local Nature Recovery Strategy on my iPad, which I use to refer to, and it's a partnership between Coventry, Warwickshire and Solihull. So I would have hoped that Stratford would have heard of it, and particularly since we have not only two climate change officers based at the council, but also we've been doing this climate change and nature fund for quite 3 years now. And also we are investing in the free trees for farmers, and also working with the Warwickshire Wildlife Trust on improving nature in the area as well. When I come back to the South Warwickshire local plan, one disappointment I've had is that obviously a plan like this not only has to depend upon evidence, it has to go before a local plan inspector, and this is a national inspector. It's not appointed or in the control of the local authority. So they have to look at it. They look at the local plan on the basis of the research that you've done, the technical research that you've done as a council, but they also have to look at national legislation as well. And then they then say whether your local plan is sound and viable and achievable. One disappointment that I've had is that we've had recently a pre-inspector came to have a look at it and said that the biodiversity net gain should not be more than 10%. Now, the actual wording of the legislation is that it should be at least 10%. But what he is doing, he's actually warned that we have to have a balance between affordable housing, which we do need for our young people, genuinely affordable young housing, biodiversity net gain, and also the standard in our home that our homes are to be built to. And we will actually, challenge that, because the legislation does say at least. But we are in the hands of an inspector about making sure that we get the local plan through. Biodiversity net gain does not only apply though to the local plan or to any development that's built in the local plan. You can still, as an authority, go ahead with other initiatives, and that is one thing that the district council is doing with the free trees for farmers, with the work that we're doing with Warwickshire Wildlife Trust and other schemes. It can go ahead, but I am worried that developers are being given this message. I hope that the final inspector who looks at the local plan takes a different view, but we must not make sure, I was a little worried, more than a little worried, that was the initial response given by the inspector.
Sorry, can I just say that the local nature recovery strategy has been passed by the district, by the county council though, so presumably it has been passed by
yes,
the county
but
council.
we're part of the partnership. The district council is part of that partnership.
Yeah,
as
the
well.
The fact the county council have passed it, and it does have areas of 15% that are in its strategy, surely that it should take that into account.
Yeah, we have to. You have to.
But can I just say that this is another example of misalignment of policy?
Yeah.
And it's really bad. So it wasn't just the biodiversity again, because actually the South Warwickshire local plan, although everyone was looking at where the houses were put, but the South Warwickshire local plan had biodiversity again of 30%, I think. And the inspector clearly said, I'm gonna fail it. You have to go back to 10%. But you got national legislation that trump everything eventually. So that's the issue. The national legislation is going too slow, or as I said to you, DEFRA does not talk to the Ministry for Housing. they just got completely opposite policies, which then cancel each other. It's really, really bad. But the other very worrying issue is that the inspector also in feedback that he was also not happy, they were also not happy, and probably the plan was not sound, because the South Warwickshire local plan team correctly for me wanted to build to the highest environmental standards, and the inspector said you cannot do that because the future home standards is no legislation yet. So, you know, we are building now, hundreds of houses with gas boilers. We're building now thousands of houses which are not fit for heat waves, not fit for flooding, not fit for, you know, the climate emergency. And, you know, by the time these houses are built, they're not going to be fit for the climate emergency. So that's why, really, you know, when the new consultation comes, you know, make sure that your voice is heard.
Well,
We are not going to accept, you know, this delay by national government.
Right, Rupert's got a question, and then that gentleman there, we might get to the end of time.
Yeah, I just wanted to try to answer David's question a bit more. The short answer, as I understand it, is that there really aren't any such stories yet. By the way, I think that as perhaps was implied, we shouldn't really be looking so much at post-apocalyptic visions. We should be looking at visions of how we get through what is coming in the best possible way, which is what I call through-topianism. We need a through-topia. We need a realistic path, which is not just a dystopian apocalypse, but not a utopian wish fulfillment fantasy. Hardly anyone's done them yet. With one partial exception I'd like to draw people's attention to if they want to follow it up, which is Chris Mage's recent book, Smage, S-M-A-J-E, which is called Finding Lights in a Dark Age, Sketches through Utopia for Agriculture. And it's a very, very, very good book.
Excellent. And then this gentleman, sorry, I think this gentleman in blue here, and then
I was going to ask why the solar panels on the leisure centre have to be ground cable. I mean, this implies they do not make a profit from the electricity that they provide. They would pay for themselves. So it's like all the shopping centres, the warehouses, there is acres of roof with no solar panels on.
Yeah.
The reason is the only thing that solar panels that are put up on houses, which is rather inefficient, is because they're grant aided. This, for me, implies it's a tax on the poor and the taxpayer for the rich. Does that make sense? I mean,
No.
if you've got acres up there, these should be making money.
And they do, but for example, running a leisure centre is quite an expensive business, but a particular swimming pool. So if you're able to kind of make sure that they don't use fossil fuel in order to be able to heat, make it comfortable for those that are visiting the leisure centres, then so much the better. So I've had solar panels on my house now since 2011, and they paid for themselves within 5 years. But we do need to make sure that more people have them. And I have to say that although I've sometimes had criticism of Orbit as a housing association, they have just done solar panels on every single solar housing association house in Ulster. Every single one of them has had new roofs and solar panels put on. We actually had legislation in this country that was started, not legislation, there was good practice that was started in this country by Merton Council many, many, many years ago, when they put forward a rule where 10% of every house being built would have solar panels automatically put on. Unfortunately, the government changed its mind at that time, and we're now just getting back to that. The future home strategy, although we will have to wait 2 years for it to be fully implementable, will mean that every new house will have solar panels on it.
yes.
Every new house, whether it's affordable or not affordable. But I commend housing associations like Orbit for putting solar panels on their housing association houses in Ulster.
Thank you. Have we got time for one more question?
We've got time for just one more
Okay,
question.
so the gentleman in the red jumper there.
The panelists, I think most of them have referred to pressures on land use in the context of farming and solar farms. And I'd just like to quote one or two numbers. The amount of land required to produce nutrition from animal farming is typically 30 times greater than the amount of land required if you grow crops on it. What this means is that if you have an acre of land and you grow a crop on 3% of it, the remaining 97% is free for other uses, such as solar farms, building houses. So we need to move away from animal produced food. And that is something that the government should be pushing really hard, and everybody should understand this issue based on those few numbers. Thank you.
We need animals too.
Yeah.
You can't have regenerative farming systems without livestock.
No, and I'll hand over in a minute, because my father was a farmer. We're no longer a farming family, but I started my life in farming, and we have to remember that we are a democracy, and people make choices. I personally am a vegetarian, but that's my choice. One of my granddaughters is not, and that's her choice. And sometimes we have to be able to accept that different people have different ways of life. But I do accept your point that we have a lot more land that can be used productively, and I think this is one of the debates for the future about how much and how we use our land. But I'll hand over to the expert in farming.
Oh well, I don't think we've got time to get into that debate now.
We could have a whole
a separate session on
a
that.
whole evening on that, I think. But so just before we finish, and I thank everybody, Manuela wanted to announce a government consultation.
Yes, very good. So I think this is something that we campaigned on, and I think many of you contacted me about. So we campaigned for a new natural history GCSE to teach our students, our young people, about biodiversity conservation, habitat conservation, and also how we influence the natural environment. And finally, the government has announced it, so there is a public consultation where we all can submit our views on what should be taught in this natural history GCSE. So can I please go on the government website when the consultation is open, because we got the best and the bright of our local climate change and environment and biodiversity community groups. So if you can contribute to that, because we campaigned a lot. We also, as part of the Education Select Committee during the curriculum assessment review inquiry as well, we really push for this important GCSE, so that more young people, can become the green carers of the future.
So yes, unfortunately we've got to finish the session now. So can I just say thank you very much to this wonderful panel. I think we could have gone on for another hour at least, and thank you all for being such an engaged audience. So thank you.
Thank you.